He found her eating from the dump, his maid, trapped in filth and hunger. What happened next tore apart his world and forced him to face a truth money couldn't buy. Could he reclaim his humanity before it was too late? Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're ready to dive into this unforgettable story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll bring you another incredible tale you absolutely can't miss. Let's get started, and don't forget to like and share to help our community grow. Jonathan Hale didn't believe in fate. He believed in numbers. Clean, predictable, controllable. Numbers had built his empire, Hale Industries, a tech conglomerate worth $4.2 billion, with offices in 12 countries and a headquarters that pierced the Manhattan skyline like a steel dagger. Numbers had given him the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the Tesla in obsidian black, the watches that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Numbers had also given him exactly 23 employees in his personal staff, though he couldn't name more than 5. Grace Washington was number 17. He knew this because his assistant, Philip, kept meticulous records. Grace Washington, 34, sanitation specialist. Your term, sir, not mine, hired 3 months ago through Tide Elite Services. Excellent performance reviews. Punctual. Invisible. Philip had smirked at that last word, and Jonathan had barely looked up from his laptop. Invisible was exactly what Jonathan wanted. Every morning at 6 a.m., Grace arrived at the penthouse through the service entrance, a separate elevator that ensured Jonathan never had to acknowledge the people who kept his life running. She moved through his 12,000-square-foot domain like a ghost, dusting the Italian marble, polishing the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park, scrubbing the bathroom where he spent exactly 8 minutes each morning. By 10 a.m., she was gone, and the only evidence of her existence was the faint scent of lemon cleaner and the absence of dust. Jonathan preferred it that way. People were messy. People had needs, emotions, complications. People disrupted the clean lines of his existence. This particular Thursday morning in late September, Jonathan stood in his kitchen, all stainless steel and sharp angles, pouring his second espresso. The coffee machine had cost $12,000 and made a sound like a jet engine. He scrolled through his phone, stock prices up, a merger closing in Tokyo, an email from his lawyer about the divorce settlement. Catherine wanted the house in the Hamptons. Fine. He'd buy another one. Behind him, so quiet he almost didn't hear, came the whisper of a cloth against glass. Grace was cleaning the window above the sink, her back to him. She wore the standard uniform, white shirt, black pants, her hair pulled into a neat bun. Her movements were efficient, economical, the cloth moving in perfect circles. Jonathan glanced at her reflection in the gleaming espresso machine and felt nothing. She was part of the machinery of his life, as essential and unremarkable as the coffee maker itself. Grace, he said, not turning around. She froze mid-swipe. Yes, Mr. Hale. The study. There's a water stain on the desk. Handle it. Of course, sir. Her voice was soft, deferential, carefully empty of personality. Good. Jonathan took his espresso and walked toward his home office, his footsteps silent on the heated marble floors. He had a video call with Singapore in 10 minutes. Catherine's lawyer would call at noon. He had exactly 0 minutes to think about the woman scrubbing his windows. The day proceeded like every other day, a blur of screens, voices, numbers that climbed or fell. Lunch was a protein shake delivered by Seamless. Dinner would be oysters at Le Bernardin with investors whose names he'd forget by morning. At 6 p.m., Jonathan's driver, Maurice, pulled the Tesla to the curb outside Hale Tower. Where to, Mr. Hale? Maurice's voice crackled through the intercom. Le Bernardin. But take the route through Chelsea. I want to check on the Hudson Yards property. Yes, sir. The Tesla glided through Manhattan's arteries, a black bullet slicing through the chaos of yellow cabs and delivery trucks. Jonathan barely looked up from his tablet, approving expense reports, denying vacation requests. The world outside the tinted windows was a blur of glass and concrete, people reduced to smudges of color. Then Maurice took a wrong turn. This isn't Chelsea, Jonathan said, glancing up. Apologies, sir. Construction. Rerouting. They were in a part of the city Jonathan couldn't recognize. The buildings here were low, crumbling, their facades tagged with graffiti. Trash bags lined the sidewalks like body bags. A man pushed a shopping cart filled with cans. A woman shouted at no one. This was New York's underbelly, the part tourists never saw, the part Jonathan had spent his entire life insulated from. "Speed up," Jonathan said, returning to his tablet. But then he saw it, a sprawling lot fenced in by chain link, mountains of garbage rising like artificial hills. The dump site. He'd read about it in a zoning proposal. The city wanted to repurpose it, and Hale Industries was bidding on the contract. Jonathan had never actually seen it. "Stop," he said suddenly. Maurice hesitated. "Sir." "Stop the car." The Tesla rolled to a halt across from the dump site. Jonathan didn't know why he'd said it. Curiosity, maybe. Or the same impulse that made him check stock prices compulsively, a need to quantify, to understand. He stepped out of the car, and the smell hit him like a fist. Rot, ammonia, something sweet and sickening. "I'll just be a moment," he told Maurice, who looked at him like he'd suggested swimming in the Hudson. Jonathan approached the fence. The sun was setting, casting the garbage in shades of orange and rust. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries sharp and mocking. He could see people moving among the trash, scavengers, he realized, picking through the refuse for anything salvageable. A man in a torn jacket. A teenager with a garbage bag slung over his shoulder. And then, behind a mound of black trash bags, he heard it, the scrape of plastic against styrofoam. Jonathan moved closer, his shoes crunching on broken glass. He rounded the mound, and that's when he saw her. Grace. His maid. Number 17. She sat cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box, her white uniform somehow still pristine despite the filth around her. In her lap was a styrofoam container, the kind restaurants used for leftovers, and she was eating with a white plastic fork, her movements slow and deliberate, savoring each bite like it was filet mignon instead of someone else's garbage. Jonathan's breath caught in his chest. She hadn't seen him yet. Her head was bowed, her focus entirely on the food. There was something almost sacred in the way she ate, a grace, the irony of her name struck him, that didn't belong in this place. Around her, the world was decay and desperation, but she sat like a queen on a throne of trash, dignified and unbroken. Then she looked up. Their eyes met across 20 feet of garbage, and Jonathan saw something he'd spent 43 years avoiding, recognition. Not of him as her employer, but of him as another human being who'd stumbled into her private shame. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. Her eyes, dark brown, exhausted, but somehow still fierce, widened, and he watched her decide in real time whether to run or stay. She stayed. Slowly, deliberately, Grace set the container down on the cardboard. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then stood, brushing dirt from her uniform with the same careful efficiency she used on his windows. She didn't speak. She didn't apologize. She just stood there, waiting for him to say something, to do something, to shatter whatever fragile dignity she'd managed to preserve. Jonathan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Behind him, Maurice honked the horn, a sharp, impatient sound that broke the spell. "Mr. Hale? You'll be late for your reservation." Jonathan turned, looked back at the Tesla with its sleek lines and tinted windows, then back at Grace. She was watching him, her expression unreadable, and he realized with a jolt that he'd never actually looked at her before. Not really. She'd been a function, a service, a line item on Philip's spreadsheet. Now she was a woman eating garbage. He started, but Grace shook her head. "It's fine, Mr. Hale," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the dump. "You should go. You'll be late." And just like that, she sat back down, picked up a fork, and resumed eating, dismissing him as completely as he dismissed her every morning for 3 months. Jonathan stood there for another 5 seconds. He counted them, because numbers were all he had, then turned and walked back to the Tesla. Maurice pulled away from the curb, and Jonathan watched the dump site recede in the side mirror until it disappeared behind a warehouse. He didn't say anything. Neither did Maurice. They drove in silence to Le Bernardin, where Jonathan ate oysters that cost $40 each and tasted like absolutely nothing. That night, back in his penthouse, Jonathan stood at the window overlooking Central Park. The city glittered below him, a constellation of wealth and power. Somewhere out there, Grace was. What? Going home? Did she have a home? Where did she sleep? What did she eat when she wasn't scavenging from a dump site? He realized he didn't know. He realized he'd never asked. He realized, for the first time in his carefully constructed life, that his numbers didn't add up. Because if Grace Washington, punctual, excellent, invisible, was eating garbage, then something in his equations was fundamentally, terribly wrong. Jonathan pulled out his phone and typed a message to Philip. I need Grace Washington's file. Everything. By morning. Then he stood at the window until dawn, watching the city wake up, and wondering how many other people he'd never actually seen. The file arrived at 6:47 a.m., delivered not by email but by Philip himself, who appeared at Jonathan's penthouse door looking disheveled, a state Jonathan had never witnessed in 5 years of employment. You said by morning, Philip explained, handing over a manila folder thick enough to be a novel. I assumed you meant early morning. Jonathan took the folder without comment and closed the door. He'd been awake all night, standing at various windows in his penthouse, watching the city's rhythm. Garbage trucks at 3 a.m., delivery vans at 4, the first joggers in Central Park at 5:30. He'd wondered, during each of those hours, which window Grace was looking through. If she had a window at all. He sat at his dining table, black walnut, imported from Germany, large enough to seat 12 though he'd never had more than 4 guests, and opened the folder. Grace Elizabeth Washington. D.O.B. April 12, 1990. Address, 4127 Webster Avenue, Apartment 2C, Bronx, New York 10470. Employment, Tidy Elite Services, Current, McDonald's, 2019 to 2023, Target, 2017 to 2019, CVS Pharmacy, 2015 to 2017. Education, High School Diploma, Morris High School, 2008. Emergency contact, Keisha Washington, sister, disconnected number. Jonathan read the list of former employers and felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Grace had worked at McDonald's for 4 years. Before that, retail for 2 years. Before that, pharmacy cashier. And now she cleaned his toilets. He flipped the page. Financial summary, obtained through Tidy Elite's employment screening. Monthly income, $2,100, gross, $1,680, net after taxes. Monthly rent, $1,400, studio, Webster Avenue. Outstanding debts, $47,000, medical bills, collection agencies. Credit score, 512. Bank account balance, $23.67, as of last paycheck. Jonathan stared at the numbers. He'd spent $23.67 on his espresso yesterday. Grace lived on it for 2 weeks. The medical bills caught his attention. He flipped further. Medical history, public records, hospital liens. Emergency room visit, Jacobi Medical Center, March 2022, acute appendicitis, emergency appendectomy. Cost, $47,000, uninsured. Payment plan defaulted, prescription medications, current none listed due to inability to pay. Jonathan's coffee had gone cold. He pushed it away. There was more. A note from Tidy Elite's background check. Ms. Washington shares apartment with sister's 3 children, ages 6, 8, 11, following sister's incarceration for drug possession. Ms. Washington is sole caretaker and provider. Sister's parental rights pending legal review. 3 children. Not her own. Her sister's. Grace was raising 3 kids on $1,680 a month, in a city where a decent meal cost $20. The math was impossible. Rent alone consumed 83% of her income. That left $280 for food, utilities, transportation, clothing, and everything else 3 growing children needed. Even Jonathan, who'd built an empire on his ability to make numbers work, couldn't make those numbers work. Which meant Grace had been making choices. Terrible choices. Like eating garbage so the kids could eat real food. Jonathan closed the folder and sat back in his German chair, in his Italian marble kitchen, in his penthouse that cost more per month in maintenance fees than Grace made in a year. The morning sun streamed through his spotless windows Grace had cleaned yesterday, and turned everything golden. It felt obscene. At 6:55 a.m., Jonathan heard the service elevator ding. Grace was early, as always. He listened to her move through the penthouse, the soft click of her supply caddy being set down in the hallway, the whisper of her footsteps toward the kitchen, the pause when she presumably noticed him sitting at the dining table instead of in his office. "Mr. Hale," she said from the kitchen doorway. Her voice was steady, professional, empty. "I didn't realize you'd be home. I can come back." "Don't." Jonathan stood, and Grace froze. Stay. Please. That last word, please, seemed to surprise her. Her eyes, those same exhausted brown eyes he'd seen at the dump site, flickered with something he couldn't name. Suspicion, maybe. Or fear. Is there something wrong with my work? She asked carefully. No. Your work is. Jonathan gestured vaguely at the immaculate penthouse. Perfect. It's always perfect. Grace waited, her hands clasped in front of her white uniform. The same uniform she'd been wearing at the dump site. Jonathan realized with a sickening clarity that she probably only owned one uniform. That she probably washed it every night in a sink because she couldn't afford a laundromat. I saw you yesterday, Jonathan said. At the dump site. Grace's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened, knuckles going pale. I know. Why were you there? The question hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Grace's jaw worked silently for a moment, and Jonathan could see her calculating how much to say, how much to hide, whether honesty would cost her the job she couldn't afford to lose. Does it matter? She finally asked. Yes. Why? It was the first time she challenged him, the first time her voice had carried anything other than deference. Jonathan didn't have an answer. Why did it matter? He could fire her, hire someone else, return to his life of clean windows and invisible service. He could forget the image of her eating garbage, could bury it under meetings and mergers and the comfortable numbness of wealth. But he couldn't. That was the problem. He'd spent all night trying to forget, and the image had only grown sharper. Because, Jonathan said slowly, the numbers don't make sense. Grace laughed, a short, bitter sound. No, Mr. Hale. They don't. They never have. The medical bills. From the appendectomy. Her face went carefully blank. How do you, she stopped, understanding dawning. You investigated me. I asked for your file. That's the same thing. Grace's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. You saw me at my lowest, and instead of looking away like a decent person, you dug into my life. Why? So you could feel better about yourself? So you could add "saw poor person eating trash" to your list of experiences? The words hit like slaps. Jonathan felt his face heat, shame, anger, he wasn't sure which. That's not. Then what is it? Grace stepped forward, and Jonathan saw the woman from the dump site, fierce, unbroken, done with invisibility. You want to understand? Fine. I'll make it simple for you. I work 60 hours a week at 3 different jobs. This one, night shifts at a diner in Queens, weekend housekeeping at a hotel in Times Square. I make $2,100 a month, and my rent is $1,400 because that's the cheapest place I could find that's safe enough for my sister's kids. I'm raising 3 children who aren't mine because their mother is in prison and the system would eat them alive. I skip meals so they can eat. I wear the same uniform every day because I can't afford another one. And yes, sometimes, when there's food at the dump site that's still good, still sealed, still safe, I eat it. Because that's what survival looks like when the numbers don't make sense. She stopped, breathing hard, her composure shattered. Jonathan stood frozen, the folder still in his hand, feeling like he'd been gutted. I'm sorry, he said. Grace shook her head. Don't apologize. Just tell me if I still have a job. Because I can't afford to lose it. Of course you still have a job. Then I should get to work. She turned toward the hallway, but Jonathan spoke before she could leave. How much do you need? Grace stopped. What? The medical bills. The debt. How much would it take to clear it? She turned back slowly, suspicion replacing anger. Why would you care? Because, Jonathan hesitated. Why did he care? 24 hours ago, Grace had been number 17, a ghost who cleaned his windows. Now she was a woman raising 3 kids on scraps, and he couldn't look away. Because I can help. I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's... What was it? Guilt? Restitution for years of willful blindness? Call it a bonus. Hazard pay for dealing with my terrible coffee habits. Grace didn't smile. Mr. Hale, people like you don't just hand out money without strings attached. What do you want? It was a fair question. Jonathan looked at the folder in his hands, at the numbers that quantified Grace's suffering, and realized he didn't have an answer. He didn't know what he wanted. He just knew that going back to yesterday, to a life where Grace was invisible and his windows were clean and nothing disrupted his carefully constructed emptiness, felt impossible. I want, he said slowly, to understand how I've lived 43 years without seeing any of this. I want to know how many other people are drowning while I'm drinking $12,000 coffee. I want. He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Grace watched him with those exhausted, fierce eyes. You want to feel human again, she said quietly. Yes. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Grace studied him for a long moment, and Jonathan had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen, really seen, for the first time in decades. The medical bills are $47,000, she finally said. But I won't take your money, Mr. Hale. If you want to help, there's a better way. What? Grace moved to the window, the one she'd been cleaning when this all started, and looked out at Central Park. Pay me what I'm worth. Not what Tidy Elite pays me. What I'm actually worth. And do the same for Maurice, for your chef, for everyone on your staff who you've never bothered to actually know. Don't give us charity. Give us dignity. Jonathan joined her at the window. Below, the city was waking up, cars flooding the streets, people rushing to jobs that barely paid enough to survive. How many of them were like Grace? How many were one medical emergency away from eating garbage? What if I did both? He asked. Paid you fairly and cleared the debt. Why? Because yesterday, I watched you eat trash, and I did nothing. I got back in my car and ate $40 oysters while you ate garbage. I need to do something, Grace. Please. Let me do something. Grace was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking at him, she said, My nephew, Jamal, he's 8. He wants to be a scientist. He checks out library books about space and reads them until the pages fall out. But his school doesn't have a science lab. Doesn't have new textbooks. Doesn't have anything except broken desks and teachers who've given up. You want to do something, Mr. Hale? Figure out how to help kids like Jamal. Because there are thousands of them, and they're all drowning in a system that doesn't care. Jonathan looked at her profile, the set of her jaw, the exhaustion in her eyes, the dignity she'd somehow maintained despite everything, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Not pity. Something bigger. Something that felt like waking up after 43 years of sleepwalking. I don't know how, he admitted. Grace finally looked at him. Then I guess we'll figure it out together. Jonathan Hale had negotiated billion-dollar deals across 3 continents. He'd stared down corporate raiders, outmaneuvered hostile takeovers, and once convinced a Japanese conglomerate to sell him their AI division for half its worth. He was not a man who hesitated. But standing outside apartment 2C at 4127 Webster Avenue in the Bronx, he hesitated. The building was a 6-story walk-up with a facade the color of old bones, graffiti crawling up its sides like ivy. The front door's lock was broken, held shut by a wire hanger twisted through the handle. Through the grimy windows, Jonathan could see a dim hallway lit by a single flickering bulb. The smell hit him before he entered, old cooking oil, mildew, something organic and rotting. This was where Grace lived. Where she raised 3 children. Where she came home after cleaning his penthouse. You didn't have to come, Grace said beside him. She'd changed out of her uniform into jeans and a faded sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, and somehow more tired. I could have just told you about. I need to see it, Jonathan interrupted. If I'm going to help, I need to understand. Grace studied him, then nodded. Okay. But fair warning, it's not pretty. She pushed through the broken door, and Jonathan followed her upstairs that creaked ominously under his weight. The walls were covered in peeling paint and water stains. On the 3rd-floor landing, a child's bicycle lay on its side, both tires flat. They passed a door where music thumped loud enough to rattle the frame, and another where Jonathan could hear a baby crying. By the time they reached the 5th floor, Jonathan was breathing hard. Grace wasn't. This is us, she said, stopping at a door marked 2C in crooked brass numbers. The C was upside down. Inside, the apartment was exactly 412 square feet. Jonathan's professional eye calculated it automatically. 1 room served as living room, dining room, and bedroom. A kitchenette was tucked into an alcove barely big enough to turn around in. A bathroom door stood ajar, revealing cracked tiles and a toilet that was running. 3 sleeping bags were rolled up in the corner, stacked next to a small pile of children's clothes folded with military precision. But what struck Jonathan wasn't the poverty. It was the care. The walls, though cracked and water-stained, had been painted a cheerful yellow, probably by Grace herself. Children's drawings covered every available surface, held up with tape, crayon rockets, marker rainbows, pencil sketches of what might have been the family Grace was trying to keep together. A bookshelf made from milk crates held library books organized by size. The sleeping bags, though worn, were clean. The single window had curtains, thin, but ironed. Grace had taken this impossible space and made it a home. "The kids are at school," Grace said, moving to the kitchenette. "I usually work your place, then come back here to get them lunch ready before my shift at the diner. Jamal has tutoring on Thursdays, so I need to." She stopped, staring into the refrigerator. Even from where Jonathan stood, he could see it was nearly empty. A half-gallon of milk, some cheese slices, a few apples, sandwich meat that looked dangerously close to its expiration date. Grace closed the refrigerator carefully and turned to Jonathan with a bright, brittle smile. "Sorry, I'd offer you something, but—" "Grace." Jonathan's voice came out rougher than intended. "How long has it been like this?" "Like what?" "Don't." He gestured at the refrigerator, the apartment, everything. "Don't pretend." "How long?" The smile cracked. Grace leaned against the counter, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked small. "Since Keisha got arrested. 18 months. Before that, we split the rent. She had a job at a call center, made decent money. But then she got into—" Grace stopped, swallowed hard. "She got into some bad stuff. Pills, first. Then worse. I tried to help her, but you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. So when she got arrested, I took the kids. I thought it would be temporary. That's what the social worker said, temporary placement with family while Keisha got treatment. But temporary became permanent. Keisha's still in Rikers. Won't be out for another 2 years, minimum. And the state pays me $400 a month per kid for foster care. Which sounds like a lot until you realize that's $1,200 total for food, clothes, school supplies, everything 3 kids need. And the waiting list for subsidized housing is 7 years long. So this," she gestured at the apartment. "This is what we've got." Jonathan moved to the window and looked out. The view was of another brick building, close enough to touch, its windows reflecting the gray sky. No park. No trees. Just concrete and glass and the sound of traffic from the street below. "You said Jamal wants to be a scientist," Jonathan said. "Yeah." Grace's voice softened. "He's brilliant, Mr. Hale. Reads at a 10th grade level and is only in 3rd. Taught himself fractions from YouTube because his school doesn't have a math specialist. He asks questions about black holes and quantum physics, and her voice broke. I can barely help him with his homework. I'm just trying to keep him fed." Jonathan turned from the window. "What about the girls?" "Destiny's 11. She's the caretaker, makes sure her siblings brush their teeth, helps with homework, way too mature for her age. And Chloe's 6. Still has nightmares about the night the police came for Keisha. Wets the bed sometimes, which is hard because we don't have a washing machine in the building, so I have to haul everything to the laundromat 6 blocks away, and—" Grace stopped, pressing her palms against her eyes. "Sorry. You didn't come here to listen to me fall apart." "Yes," Jonathan said quietly. "I did." Grace lowered her hands, and her eyes were wet but fierce. "Why, though? That's what I don't understand. You're a billionaire. You could be anywhere right now, in your penthouse, at your office, on a yacht somewhere. Why are you standing in my falling apart apartment listening to my problems?" It was a fair question. Jonathan had asked himself the same thing during the entire car ride to the Bronx. Maurice had been bewildered when Jonathan insisted on driving himself in a rented Honda instead of the Tesla. Why did he care? What was he hoping to accomplish? The truth was uncomfortably simple. "Because I'm 43 years old," Jonathan said, "and I've never done anything that mattered. I've made billions of dollars, closed hundreds of deals, built an empire that will probably outlast me. And for what? So I can die alone in a penthouse full of things I don't need? Yesterday, when I saw you at that dump site, something broke. I realized I'd been living in a glass tower, looking down at the world but never actually touching it. never letting it touch me. And he paused, the words harder than any negotiation. I'm lonely, Grace. I'm so goddamn lonely, and I didn't even know it until I saw you eating garbage with more dignity than I've ever had in my life. The silence that followed was thick and charged. Grace stared at him, and Jonathan felt exposed in a way no boardroom had ever made him feel. You want to know what matters? Grace finally asked. Yes. She walked to the milk crate bookshelf and pulled out a composition notebook with a rocket ship drawn on the cover in crayon. She handed it to Jonathan. Jamal's science journal. He writes in it every night before bed. Read the last entry. Jonathan opened the notebook carefully. The pages were filled with a child's cramped handwriting, diagrams of solar systems, questions about gravity and time. The last entry was dated yesterday. Today Mrs. Chen said we can't do the volcano experiment because the school doesn't have money for baking soda and vinegar. I said I could bring some from home, but Aunt Grace says we need the baking soda for cleaning and we don't have vinegar. I wish I could go to a school that had science stuff. I wish a lot of things. But Aunt Grace says wishes don't matter as much as work, so I'm going to work really hard and maybe someday I'll be a scientist and I'll make enough money that Aunt Grace doesn't have to work so much. She's tired all the time. I can tell even when she smiles. Sometimes I hear her crying in the bathroom at night when she thinks we're asleep. I want to make her stop being sad. That's my mission, like astronauts have missions. Mission: make Aunt Grace happy. Jonathan's vision blurred. He closed the notebook carefully and handed it back to Grace. That's what matters, Grace said softly. Not deals or empires. Kids who want to see their aunt smile. That's everything. Jonathan nodded, not trusting his voice. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. Philip. I need $50,000 in cash delivered to my location within the hour. Also, contact the superintendent of NYC Public Schools. I want a meeting tomorrow morning. Non-negotiable. What are you doing? Grace asked. Something I should have done years ago. Jonathan looked around the apartment again. Really looked, seeing not just the poverty but the love that held it together. I'm going to clear your medical debt. I'm going to pay you a real salary, $75,000 a year, starting today. I'm going to make sure Jamal's school has a science lab that would make NASA jealous. And then I'm going to figure out how many other Graces and Jamals are out there, and I'm going to help them too. Mr. Hale. Jonathan. Please. I think we're past formalities. Grace shook her head, overwhelmed. This is too much. I can't accept. You can. And you will. Because you are right. I want to feel human again. And helping you, helping those kids, that's the first human thing I've done in years. He paused. But I need your help. I don't know this world. I don't know what real people need. I need you to show me. Will you do that? Grace looked at him for a long moment, then at Jamal's notebook, then back at Jonathan. You're serious. This isn't some rich guy guilt trip that'll last a week. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Okay, Grace said slowly. But we do this my way. No press. No publicity stunts. No using these kids as props for your redemption arc. You want to help? Then actually help. Show up. Learn. Get your hands dirty. Deal. They shook hands. Grace's palm was rough with calluses, Jonathan's soft and manicured, and something shifted. An alliance formed. A purpose crystallized. Jonathan's phone buzzed. A text from Philip. Sir, are you being held hostage? Should I contact authorities? Jonathan laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in months. He typed back. No hostage situation. Just a revelation. Send the money. Set up the meeting. And Philip? Clear my schedule for the next month. I'm going back to school. What happens when a billionaire tries to fix a broken system? When privilege meets purpose, can real change happen, or will good intentions crumble against impossible odds? Drop your thoughts below. 2 hours later, Jonathan sat on the floor of apartment 2C, his $1,000 suit jacket discarded, his Italian leather shoes kicked off, playing cards with 3 children who looked at him like he was an alien who'd crashed through their ceiling. You don't know go fish? Destiny asked, incredulous. She was 11. With Grace's fierce eyes and a skepticism that belonged to someone much older. I've never played, Jonathan admitted. What did you do when you were a kid? Jamal asked. He was small for 8, with glasses held together by tape and a mind that moved faster than his mouth. Didn't you have friends? I had tutors. And boarding schools. That's sad, Chloe whispered. She was 6, curled against Grace's side, watching Jonathan like he might disappear if she blinked. Yeah, Jonathan agreed. It really is. They played 3 rounds of Go Fish, Jonathan lost all 3, and then Jamal disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a battered book called A Brief History of Time. Can you explain this part? Jamal asked, opening to a page covered in his penciled notes. It talks about event horizons, but I don't understand how time can stop. Jonathan took the book, looked at the complex physics, and realized he had no idea how to explain it at an 8-year-old's level. He'd built a tech empire, but he couldn't talk to a child about black holes. I don't know, he admitted. But I know someone who does. How would you like to visit Columbia University's physics department next week? I have a friend there who'd love to meet you. Jamal's eyes went wide. Really? Really? We can make it a field trip. All of you. Even me. Chloe asked. Especially you. Grace, watching from the kitchenette where she was making sandwiches from the meager supplies, caught Jonathan's eye. She mouthed, "Thank you." Jonathan mouthed back, "Thank you too." Because sitting on that floor, losing at cards, trying to explain physics he didn't understand to a kid who deserved every opportunity in the world, that felt more real than any deal he'd ever closed. That felt like purpose. That felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. The boardroom at Hale Industries had witnessed countless battles, hostile takeovers, merger negotiations, executive terminations delivered with surgical precision. But it had never witnessed this. Absolutely not, Roger Pemberton said, slamming his portfolio on the table. He was CFO, had been with Jonathan for 15 years, and looked at his boss like he'd suggested setting the building on fire. Jonathan, this is corporate suicide. Around the mahogany table, the other executives nodded. 12 faces, all white, all male, all wearing suits that cost more than Grace made in a month. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, looking at the men who'd helped him build his empire, and saw them clearly for the first time. They were him. The old him. The him from 2 weeks ago. Let me make sure I understand your objection, Jonathan said calmly. You're opposed to raising minimum wage for all Hale Industries employees to $25 an hour. It's not sustainable, Roger insisted. Do you know what that would cost? We employ 3,400 people in entry-level positions. That's an additional $47 million annually in labor costs. Our shareholders will revolt. Our shareholders made $890 million in profit last year. I think they can spare $47 million. It's not about whether they can, interjected Thomas Chen, VP of Operations. It's about precedent. You start paying janitors $25 an hour, every other company in our sector has to follow suit or lose their workforce. You're disrupting the entire labor market. Good, Jonathan said. The room went silent. Good. Roger's face was turning an alarming shade of red. Jonathan, listen to yourself. 2 weeks ago, you were arguing that we needed to cut costs to stay competitive. Now you want to increase labor expenses by 340%? What the hell happened to you? What happened was Grace Washington eating garbage while he drank $12,000 coffee. What happened was Jamal's science journal and Destiny's premature maturity and Chloe's nightmares. What happened was Jonathan waking up after 43 years of sleepwalking. I met someone who showed me what our competitive costs actually look like, Jonathan said. They look like single mothers working 3 jobs and still not making rent. They look like brilliant kids in failing schools because we've decided that quarterly earnings matter more than human dignity. They look like people eating trash while we debate whether our yachts should be 80 feet or 90. This is about that Maid, isn't it? Thomas said. The one you've been, what? Playing savior with? Jonathan, that's admirable, truly. Help her out, write a check, feel good about yourself. But don't blow up our entire business model because you had an emotional moment at a dump site. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. Her name is Grace. And she's not a moment. She's a woman raising 3 kids on poverty wages while cleaning the homes of people who literally don't see her. And she's not alone. There are millions of Graces, and we're the reason they're drowning. We're not a charity, Jonathan, Roger said, his tone gentler now, like he was talking to someone having a breakdown. We're a business. Our responsibility is to our shareholders, not to. Not to what? People? Human beings? When did we decide that making money meant we could ignore the people who make it possible? This is getting nowhere, cut in David Brennan, the board's senior member. He was 72, had known Jonathan's father, and spoke with the authority of old money. Jonathan, I knew your father. Built this company from nothing, taught you everything about business. He'd be ashamed to see you throwing it away on some misguided crusade. That stopped Jonathan cold. His father, Richard Hale, who died when Jonathan was 25, who'd taught him that sentiment was the enemy of success, that business was war and only winners mattered. His father would absolutely be ashamed. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan didn't care. My father, Jonathan said quietly, died alone in a hospital room, surrounded by lawyers instead of family, because he'd spent his entire life building an empire and forgot to build a life. I loved him. I respected him. But I don't want to be him. Not anymore. He pulled out his phone and brought up a photo, one he'd taken last week at apartment 2C. Jamal, Destiny, and Chloe, grinning at the camera, holding certificates from their field trip to Colombia. Behind them, barely visible, was Grace, smiling that real smile Jonathan had learned to recognize, the one that meant genuine happiness instead of polite servitude. You want to know what happened to me? Jonathan turned his phone around, showing the executives the photo. These kids happened. Grace happened. I realized that I've spent my entire life accumulating things, money, power, property, and it's left me emptier than if I'd had nothing at all. So yes, I'm changing our business model. Yes, I'm raising wages. And if the board wants to remove me for it, then do it. But I'm not going back to the person I was 2 weeks ago. I can't. The silence that followed was deafening. Roger looked at the others, then back at Jonathan. You're serious. This isn't negotiable. No, it's not. Then you leave us no choice. We'll be calling for a vote of no confidence at tomorrow's emergency board meeting. The shareholders won't stand for this, Jonathan. You'll lose everything you've built. Maybe, Jonathan said. But I'll still have the thing that actually matters, my humanity. That's something I didn't have 2 weeks ago, and I'm not giving it back. He walked out of the boardroom, leaving 12 stunned executives behind. In the hallway outside, Jonathan's hands were shaking. He'd just committed professional suicide. By tomorrow, he'd likely be voted out of his own company. The empire he'd spent 20 years building would belong to someone else. And strangely, he felt lighter than he had in decades. His phone rang. Grace. Hey, he answered, leaning against the wall. Hey yourself. How'd the meeting go? I think I just got myself fired. There was a pause. Because of the wage increase. Yeah. Jonathan. Grace's voice was pained. I never wanted you to lose everything. Maybe we can walk it back, find a compromise. No. Jonathan was surprised by the certainty in his voice. No compromises. You were right. If I'm going to do this, I do it all the way. No half measures. No PR stunts. Real change, even if it costs me everything. You're insane. Probably. But I'm also happy. For the first time in my life, I actually did something that matters. Win or lose tomorrow, that's worth more than any company. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then, the kids want to know if you're still coming for dinner tonight. Jamal made a poster about the Andromeda Galaxy. It's mostly glitter and completely scientifically inaccurate, but is very proud. Jonathan smiled, a real smile, the kind he'd forgotten he could make. Tell him I'll be there at 6. And Grace? Thank you. For what? For seeing me. For showing me what I'd been missing. For giving me a reason to burn it all down. You're welcome, Jonathan. Now go figure out how to save your company. Because those 3,400 entry-level employees, they're counting on you. She hung up, and Jonathan stood in the empty hallway of his empire, thinking about glitter galaxies and children who believed in him and a woman who'd eaten garbage with more dignity than he'd ever possessed. Tomorrow, he'd fight for his company. Tonight, he'd have dinner on the floor of a cramped apartment in the Bronx, and it would be the best meal of his life. The emergency board meeting convened at 9 a.m. in a conference room that overlooked Manhattan like a throne room. 27 shareholders, 12 executives, and a handful of lawyers filled the space. Jonathan stood alone at the front. No notes, no PowerPoint, just him and the truth. "Before you vote," he said, "I want to tell you a story." And he did. He told them about Grace, not using her name, protecting her privacy, but telling them about a woman who worked 3 jobs and raised 3 kids and still ate garbage because the math didn't work. He told them about Jamal's science journal and Destiny's premature maturity and Chloe's nightmares. He told them about visiting schools with broken desks and no supplies, about families living in apartments smaller than his closet, about the invisible army of people who kept their world running while drowning in poverty. "I built this company on efficiency," Jonathan continued. "On maximizing profit and minimizing cost. I treated human beings like line items on a spreadsheet. And it made us billions. But it also made us complicit in a system that's fundamentally broken. We can't fix everything. But we can fix what's in our power to fix. We can pay people enough to live. We can give them health care. We can treat them like human beings instead of resources to be exploited." He paused, looking at the faces around the table, some sympathetic, most skeptical, a few openly hostile. "You're going to vote me out," Jonathan said. "I understand. You have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, and what I'm proposing threatens short-term profits. But before you do, I want you to ask yourselves one question. What are we building? Another company that makes rich people richer while poor people starve? Or something that actually matters?" He sat down. The vote took 17 minutes. 23 votes to remove Jonathan Hale as CEO. 4 votes to keep him. Roger Pemberton looked almost sad as he announced the results. "Jonathan, effective immediately, you're removed from your position as CEO of Hale Industries. We'll be appointing an interim replacement and beginning a search for your permanent successor. You'll retain your shares, of course, but you'll have no operational authority." Jonathan nodded slowly. 20 years of work, gone in 17 minutes. "Can I say one more thing?" he asked. Roger gestured for him to proceed. "I'm going to use my shares, which, if I'm not mistaken, still constitute 47% of the company, to block any decision that rolls back the wage increases or benefits I implemented. You can remove me, but you can't undo what I started. Those 3,400 people are going to get $25 an hour, and there's nothing you can do about it." The room erupted. "That's extortion," Thomas shouted. "That's shareholder rights," Jonathan countered. "You want to run the company? Fine. Run it. But you'll run it my way when it comes to how we treat our people." David Brennan stood, his face grave. "Jonathan, you're destroying your father's legacy." "No," Jonathan said, standing to face the old man. "I'm finally living up to it. My father built something from nothing. He created jobs, opportunities, futures. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that business is made of people. I'm just remembering." He walked out of the boardroom for the last time, and the strangest thing happened. He started laughing. He'd lost his company, his title, probably his reputation in the business world. And he felt free. 3 months later, Jonathan Hale stood in front of a brick building in the South Bronx that looked like it had been through a war. In a way, it had decades of neglect, underfunding, and systemic abandonment. The sign above the entrance read PS 042, Morris Heights Elementary School, but half the letters were missing, so it actually read PS 04, Mois Aig Tslen Ari Seul. Jamal's school. "You sure about this?" Grace asked beside him. She was wearing a new coat, Jonathan had insisted, though she'd fought him on it, and looked less exhausted than she had 3 months ago. The medical debt was gone. The rent was paid 6 months in advance. She'd quit her other 2 jobs and was now the director of community outreach for the Hale Foundation, a non-profit Jonathan had founded with the liquidated assets from his personal investment portfolio. He'd lost his company, but he'd gained a mission. "I've never been surer of anything," Jonathan said, looking up at the crumbling building. "Ready." They walked through doors that didn't close properly into a hallway with flickering fluorescent lights and peeling linoleum. The smell of industrial cleaner couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of mold. Children's artwork covered the walls, bright splashes of color trying to overcome the institutional gray. Principal Angela Morrison met them in the hallway, A black woman in her 50s with grey streaks in her hair and eyes that had seen too many budget cuts and broken promises. "Mr. Hale," she said, shaking his hand with obvious skepticism. "Grace said you wanted to tour the school. I have to warn you, we're not exactly equipped for visitors. The boiler's broken, half the bathrooms don't work, and our computer lab consists of 6 machines from 2008. "That's exactly why I'm here," Jonathan said. "I want to see what needs to change." Principal Morrison studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "All right. But don't make promises you can't keep. These kids have heard enough of those." The tour was devastating. In the 3rd grade classroom, Jamal's classroom, 42 students shared 30 desks. Some kids sat 2 to a chair. Others sat on the floor. The textbooks were from 1997, their covers held together with duct tape. A map of the world still showed the Soviet Union. The teacher, Mrs. Chen, was using her own money to buy pencils and paper. "How much?" Jonathan asked quietly. "I'm sorry." Mrs. Chen looked confused. "How much of your own money do you spend on supplies?" Mrs. Chen glanced at Principal Morrison, who nodded. "About $2,000 a year. Maybe more. I don't really keep track." Jonathan pulled out his phone and made a note. Then another. And another. The science lab that didn't exist. The library with more empty shelves than books. The cafeteria serving meals that barely met nutritional requirements. The gymnasium with a roof that leaked so badly they couldn't use it when it rained. The playground with equipment so rusted and dangerous it had been cordoned off with caution tape. By the time they reached Principal Morrison's office, a cramped space with a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that didn't close, Jonathan had filled 3 pages with notes. "How?" he asked, sitting down heavily. "How is this acceptable in the richest city in the richest country in the world?" Principal Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really want to know? Because funding is based on property taxes, and this neighborhood's property values are in the toilet. Because the politicians who control the budget send their kids to private schools, so they don't care if ours are falling apart. Because every year we're told to do more with less, and we're so busy keeping the lights on that we can't actually educate. That's how." "What would it take?" Jonathan asked. "To fix it. All of it. What would it actually take?" "You mean realistically or in Fantasyland?" "Both." Principal Morrison pulled out a battered notebook, similar to Jamal's science journal, Jonathan noticed, and flipped through pages of calculations. "Realistically? With the bureaucracy and the unions and the procurement processes? Maybe $15 million over 5 years. Fantasyland, where I could just wave a magic wand and fix everything tomorrow. $8 million. New roof, new boiler, new bathrooms, new computers, fully stocked library, science lab, art supplies, music program, updated textbooks, teacher bonuses, nutrition upgrades, playground renovation, and a salary increase so we can actually retain good teachers instead of losing them to schools in better neighborhoods." Jonathan looked at Grace, who was watching him with those fierce eyes that had changed his life. "I can do $10 million, Jonathan said. "Not over 5 years. Now. But I want to do it right. No bureaucracy, no procurement red tape, just direct funding to fix what's broken. Can you work with that?" Principal Morrison's notebook slipped from her fingers. "I'm sorry, what?" $10 million. 4PS042. "I'll establish a trust that funds ongoing maintenance and improvements. Grace will oversee it to make sure the money goes where it needs to go, not where some administrator thinks it should go." "Mr. Hale," Principal Morrison said slowly, People like you don't just walk into schools like this and write checks for $10 million. "They should," Jonathan said. "And maybe after this, they will." The transformation of PS042 took 4 months. Jonathan was there for most of it, not writing checks from a distance but actually present, wearing jeans and work boots, helping construction crews, painting classrooms, installing bookshelves. He learned the names of every teacher, every custodian, every cafeteria worker. He ate lunch with the kids in the renovated cafeteria, played basketball in the repaired gymnasium, read stories in the library that now had more books than empty shelves. And he learned. He learned that Mrs. Chen had a master's degree in education but made $52,000 a year. He learned that the security guard, Mr. Williams, worked 2 jobs to support his mother's cancer treatment. He learned that the lunch lady, Rosa, had 3 kids of her own in the school and gave them her employee discount meals because otherwise they'd go hungry. He learned that poverty wasn't a moral failure. It was a system designed to keep people trapped. And he learned that one school wasn't enough. On a Tuesday in early February, 6 months after he'd seen Grace eating at the dump site, Jonathan stood in the renovated science lab at PS042, watching Jamal conduct an experiment with actual, real, working equipment. The boy wore safety goggles that fit, used chemicals that were properly labeled, and took notes in a new journal Jonathan had given him, this one with future scientist embossed on the cover. "Mr. Hale, look," Jamal called, holding up a beaker of blue liquid. "I made copper sulfate crystals. They're growing." Jonathan walked over, and Jamal explained the chemical process with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally been given the tools to explore his passion. Behind them, 30 other kids conducted their own experiments, supervised by a new science teacher Jonathan had recruited from Columbia, DR. Patricia Hayes, who'd taken a pay cut to teach here because she believed in the mission. "You did this," Grace said quietly, appearing beside Jonathan. 6 months ago, this room was a storage closet filled with broken desks. Now look at it." Jonathan looked. State-of-the-art equipment. Proper ventilation. Supplies that would last years instead of weeks. Kids who looked engaged instead of defeated. "We did this," he corrected. "I just provided the money. You provided the vision. Don't sell yourself short. You provided something more important than money. You provided hope. These kids believe their lives can be different now. That's worth more than all the equipment in this room." Jonathan watched Jamal carefully pipette a solution, his tongue stuck out in concentration, and felt something warm expand in his chest. Not pride, exactly. Something deeper. Purpose. "I got a call yesterday," Jonathan said. "From the Gates Foundation. They want to partner with us, replicate what we did here at 50 schools across the country. Bill Gates himself called me." Grace's eyes widened. "That's incredible." "Yeah. And the mayor called too. Wants to make PS042 a model for education reform in New York. Suddenly everyone wants to talk about fixing schools." Jonathan smiled wryly. Funny how nobody cared until a billionaire showed up with a checkbook. "That's how change happens, though," Grace said. "Someone has to be first. Someone has to show it's possible. You did that. We did that. And we're not done." Over the past 6 months, the Hale Foundation had grown beyond Jonathan's wildest expectations. The $10 million for PS042 had been just the beginning. He'd sold his penthouse, got $47 million for it, and used the money to establish a fund for medical debt relief, clearing $23 million in debt for 2,400 families in the Bronx alone. He'd partnered with housing advocates to create affordable units in buildings he'd purchased and renovated. He'd launched a small business grant program for entrepreneurs in underserved neighborhoods. And most importantly, he'd started a movement. Other billionaires were watching, some skeptically, some with genuine interest. 3 had already committed to similar foundations in their cities. The media called it conscious capitalism. Jonathan called it basic human decency. But the best part, the part that made everything worthwhile, was standing right here in this science lab, watching kids discover their potential. "Uncle Jonathan," a voice called. Jonathan turned to see Destiny running toward him, Chloe close behind. They'd started calling him Uncle Jonathan 2 months ago, after he'd officially become part of their lives, not as a benefactor, but as family. They had dinner together twice a week. He attended Destiny's basketball games and Chloe's dance recitals. He helped with homework and tucked them in when Grace was too exhausted. He'd gained 3 nieces and nephews. He'd gained Grace's friendship, which had slowly, carefully, blossomed into something deeper. Though they were taking it slow, both of them scarred by past relationships, both of them wanting to get it right. "What's up?" Jonathan asked as Destiny skidded to a stop in front of him. "Mrs. Morrison says we can show you the art room now. They hung up our paintings. And mine's the biggest," Chloe added proudly. Jonathan let the girls drag him out of the science lab, Grace following with an amused smile. They walked down hallways that were bright and clean, past classrooms buzzing with engaged students, through a school that had been transformed from a warehouse of forgotten kids into a beacon of possibility. The art room was stunning. Proper lighting, real supplies, student work displayed on walls painted in cheerful colors. Chloe's painting, a portrait of Grace surrounded by flowers, hung in the center, and it was indeed the biggest. "You like it?" Chloe asked, suddenly shy. Jonathan knelt down to her level. "I love it. Your Aunt Grace looks beautiful." "She is beautiful," Chloe said matter-of-factly. "And you make her smile more now. Before you came, she smiled, but it was a sad smile. Now it's a happy smile. So thank you for that." Jonathan's throat tightened. He looked up at Grace, who had tears in her eyes. "Thank you," he said to Chloe, "for sharing her with me." That evening, after dinner of homemade lasagna in apartment 2C, which was now apartment 5E in a renovated building with working appliances and windows that actually closed, Jonathan and Grace stood on the small balcony overlooking the Bronx. "I need to tell you something," Grace said, her hand finding his. "Okay. 6 months ago, I was eating garbage. I was drowning. I couldn't see any way out. And then you showed up, and you saw me, really saw me, and everything changed. You saved my life, Jonathan." "Grace. Let me finish. You saved my life. But here's the thing, I think I saved yours too. You were drowning in a different way. Drowning in emptiness and isolation and wealth that didn't mean anything. We saved each other. And I needed you to know that." Jonathan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, coconut shampoo, not lemon cleaner anymore. "I spent 43 years building an empire I thought would make me happy. It took losing it all to realize that happiness was never about what I had. It was about who I am when I'm with people who matter. With you. With the kids. With a community that I'm actually part of instead of just observing from a distance. So no regrets. About the company, the life you had before." Jonathan thought about his penthouse, his Tesla, his $12,000 coffee machine. Then he thought about Jamal's copper sulfate crystals and Chloe's painting and Destiny's basketball games. He thought about Grace's real smile and the way the kids called him Uncle Jonathan and the science lab full of hope. "Not even one," he said. Behind them, through the window, they could hear the kids arguing about whose turn it was to pick the movie. Normal, domestic, wonderfully mundane chaos. "They want to know if you're staying for movie night," Grace said. "I'm staying," Jonathan said. "If you'll have me." "Always." They kissed as the sun set over the Bronx, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. 6 months ago, Jonathan had been a billionaire with everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. Now he was just a man who'd found his humanity in the most unlikely place, in the fierce eyes of a woman eating garbage with dignity, in the dreams of children who deserved better, in a community that had welcomed him despite having every reason not to. He'd lost an empire. He'd gained a home. And that, Jonathan Hale finally understood, was what wealth really meant. 1 year later, the ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was filled with New York's elite, philanthropists, politicians, celebrities, and the kind of people who donated millions without blinking. Jonathan stood at the podium in a tuxedo that felt foreign after a year of jeans and work boots, looking out at faces he recognized but no longer related to. "Thank you for coming," he said into the microphone. "A year ago, I stood in a boardroom and lost my company because I chose to pay people a living wage. At the time, it felt like the end of everything. But it was actually the beginning." He gestured to the screen behind him, which showed photos from PS042, the renovated science lab, Jamal accepting an award at the citywide science fair, Destiny leading her basketball team to victory, Chloe performing in the school's first music recital in a decade. This is what $10 million looks like when it's spent on people instead of profit margins. 1 school. 400 kids. Countless changed lives. And tonight, I'm asking you to help me multiply that impact. The Hale Foundation has identified 200 schools across America that need similar interventions. We have the blueprints. We have the expertise. What we need is funding. And partnership. The screen changed to show a number, $2 billion. That's our goal for the next 5 years. Ambitious? Absolutely. Impossible? A year ago, I would have said yes. Today, having seen what's possible when we choose humanity over profit, I know it's not only possible, it's necessary. He paused, looking out at the crowd. I used to think wealth meant having the biggest number in the bank account. Now I know it means something different. It means the kid who discovers a passion for science because someone gave him a lab. It means the single mother who can feed her kids because someone paid her a living wage. It means the community that thrives because someone decided they mattered. That's wealth. Everything else is just numbers. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. When it finally died down, Jonathan said, "I'd like to introduce someone. The woman who changed my life by letting me see hers. Grace Washington, director of the Hale Foundation." Grace walked onto the stage in a midnight blue dress, looking confident and radiant and nothing like the exhausted woman eating garbage 14 months ago. She took the microphone, and Jonathan stepped back, giving her the spotlight she'd always deserved. "A year ago," Grace said, her voice clear and strong, "I was invisible. I cleaned homes for people who never looked at me. I raised my sister's kids on wages that didn't add up. I ate scraps from a dump site because that was the only way to make the math work. And then Jonathan Hale saw me. Really saw me. Not as a servant or a charity case, but as a person. And in seeing me, he found himself." She looked at Jonathan, and the love in her eyes made his breath catch. "Change doesn't happen when rich people write checks from a distance," Grace continued. "It happens when we bridge the gap between worlds. When we see each other as human beings instead of functions or statistics. When we choose connection over comfort." Jonathan did that. And tonight, we're asking you to do the same. Don't just donate. Get involved. Visit the schools. Meet the families. Learn their names. Let them change you the way they changed us. The applause was deafening. By the end of the night, the Hale Foundation had raised $347 million in commitments. Not $2 billion. Not yet, but a start. A real start. In the car ride back to the Bronx, Jonathan had sold the Tesla, bought a sensible Subaru. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "You were amazing tonight," Jonathan said. "So were you. Look at us, from dump site to the Plaza Ballroom. That's quite a journey. Best journey of my life." "Mine too." Grace paused, then, "Keisha's parole hearing is next month. If she gets out, she'll want to see the kids." Jonathan felt Grace tense against him, knew this had been weighing on her. "How do you feel about that?" Terrified. Hopeful. Angry. Grateful. All of it at once. She's their mother, and she deserves a chance to be better. But she hurt them, Jonathan. She left them, chose drugs over them, and I'm the one who picked up the pieces. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together. You, me, the kids. We're a family now. All of us. Even if that means sharing them with Keisha. Even then. There's no limit on how many people can love those kids. And maybe, Jonathan chose his words carefully, maybe Keisha needs the same thing I needed. Someone to see her. To believe she can be better. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed softly. "Look at you. A year ago you could barely remember your employees' names. Now you're advocating for second chances for drug addicts. I'm advocating for humanity. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption. Even billionaires who used to be assholes. You were never an asshole. Just asleep. And you woke me up." They drove through the city in comfortable silence, past the dump site where it all began, now cleaned up and converted to a community garden, another Hale Foundation project, past the building where Jonathan used to live, past a world that looked different now that he was seeing it through clear eyes. When they pulled up to apartment 5E, the lights were on. Through the window, Jonathan could see Jamal at the kitchen table, bent over homework. Destiny watching TV. Chloe drawing in her sketchbook. "Home. Ready?" Grace asked. Jonathan looked at the woman who'd shown him what mattered, at the building full of families who'd welcomed him into their community, at the life he'd built from the ashes of his old one. "Yeah," he said, taking her hand. "I'm ready." They walked inside together, and if the people on the street noticed a billionaire-turned-philanthropist entering a modest apartment building in the Bronx, they didn't care. Because in this neighborhood, Jonathan Hale wasn't special. He was just Jonathan. Uncle Jonathan to 3 kids. Partner to Grace. Friend to a community. Just a man who'd found his humanity at a dump site and never looked back. And that was worth more than any empire. Looking back on Jonathan and Grace's journey, from a chance encounter at a dump site to transforming hundreds of lives, what does wealth truly mean to you? Is it measured in bank accounts, or in the lives we touch and the difference we make? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for experiencing this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, Please share it with someone who needs to hear it.